The morning humiliation hits before I can wipe the soil from my hands. A relative in a designer coat points at my pumpkins like evidence at a crime scene, while the compliance officer, chin lifted and badge gleaming, measures my garden with his eyes and a smirk that says men like me should learn their place. The corridor of garage doors becomes a gallery of silent judges, perfume and coffee steam mixing with cold metal and wet leaves, while I stand in work boots and a faded jacket, a widower with a blue folder pressed to my ribs and October sunlight warming the orange shells my wife and I once planted as a promise against winter. I feel the sting of being ignored at the counter, the guard rifling my folder without cause, the whispered verdicts sliding along the concrete, but I steady my breath, mark the time, and trace the line of river stones that hold their ground, because before this day is over, I will read the rule out loud, set the record straight, and turn their procedure into the path back to my dignity. Before I continue, tap subscribe and say where you're listening. If this resonates, share it so doors stay open for people like me. The humiliation starts before I can wipe the soil from my palms. I am crouched at the edge of the entry bed, checking the round bellies of the pumpkins my wife and I used to plant every October, when a relative from the far row points at the vines as if they were a hazard and not a memory. The breeze carries her words across the asphalt like a small alarm, and heads lift along the corridor of garage doors. The morning is bright and crisp, the kind of October air that smells like wet leaves and cold iron, and suddenly my small patch of orange feels like a spotlight I did not ask for. I stand, knees creaking, and brush off the grit. The pumpkins are warm where the sun lands, cool in the shade where the concrete lip meets the mulch. A leaf sticks to my wrist. Across the path, a stroller stops. A dog pauses mid-sniff, and a neighbor lowers a sack of groceries to watch. The relative gestures toward the bulletin board and then to the bed, giving the sense that something official is already in motion. The shame is quiet but heavy, settling in my shoulders the way late-season frost settles into grass, delicate until you step on it and hear it break. A compliance officer appears with a clipboard and a long swinging lanyard, the plastic badge tapping his chest. He looks past me first as if permission should be sought elsewhere, then back to the pumpkins like they're a measuring problem. I can smell the faint scuff of rubber from his soles and the sweetness of a bakery box someone carries by. My blue folder sits on the stoop behind me, its edges softened from years of folding and unfolding. Inside are regulations I have read more times than I can count, words I have learned to lean on, words my wife once teased me for knowing by section number. People form a crescent at an unspoken distance. Their breath fogs lightly, little puffs that rise and vanish. I feel the grit under my nails and the ache at the base of my neck that comes when I brace too long. There is a notice taped to the community mailbox, white paper flapping like a loose sail, but I cannot see the details from here. The compliance officer places a fresh sheet on his clipboard. The pen squeaks as it anchors in the clip, a sound I know from years of forms and signatures. I take out my notebook, the lined one, the old habit, and note the time, the building number, the corner where the curb meets the bed. The page smells faintly of pencil dust and cardboard from the recycled cover. I write the heading I always write when something begins to turn. What I saw, who was present, what rule applies. The pumpkins glow at my ankles with a color that once meant pies in our kitchen and now means proof if I treat them carefully enough. My hands are steady because I make them be. The compliance officer starts talking through process. Not to me, not yet. He gestures gently at the edge of the bed, at the mulch line, at the perceived overreach of vines. I look at the vines, too, and follow the pattern of their creeping, the way they respect the low barrier I set with river stones. I remember the morning I placed those stones, spacing them with a ruler like a boy, humming the tune my wife used to hum when she wanted time to move slower. There is a scent of gasoline from a landscaping cart idling down the lane, and the distant burr of a leaf blower that turns the air into a faraway metallic comb. Security steps out of the office door across the way, a tall figure with an incident log tucked beneath one arm. The paper edges are puckered where the humidity got in a week ago. The guard scans the scene the way they're trained, first for safety, then for compliance, then for escalation. His radio chirps with a tiny high note. I keep my palms open and down, the universal sign that I understand the sequence of things, and I wait as if patience were something I can put on like a jacket. My granddaughter stands back by the gate. Maya is 12 and curious in the way that keeps adults honest, but she knows not to come forward unless I motion. Her hoodie is the color of rainwater, and her sneakers knock a quiet rhythm against the metal grate. She watches my hands, the folder, the pumpkins. She knows the blue folder means there are words inside that matter, and that I have learned to trust words laid out in sections and subsections with dates and notes. Her presence steadies me as the moment tips toward official. I can sense the relative's attention sliding from outrage to performance, because that is what happens when a crowd forms. The crowd wants a role. Phones angle. Someone clears a throat. I heard earlier in the week that an assembly was coming, the kind of late-timed meeting that tries to solve a season with a single page. I keep thinking about the way October makes people hurry. There is only so much light to use, only so many evenings when the air tastes like apples and wood, only so many times you can say a name aloud before it feels more memory than breath. The compliance officer finally addresses me directly and points to my pumpkins, his finger stopping just short of the nearest stem. His pen hovers above the sheet. He glances toward the mailbox where the printed notice flaps, and then toward the security office door where the guard now waits on the stoop. The officer touches a line on his form, then looks back at the bed as if measuring without a tape. The scent of mulch and pumpkin skin rises as a new ray of sunlight tilts across the curb. Somewhere a car door softly thumps closed, and the latch clicks. Two small sounds that always make me think of promises kept. I reach for the blue folder and feel the familiar dip where the cardboard is softened. The folder opens with a breathy rasp. Within it, a copy of the homeowner's rules sits under a clear sleeve. Section numbers are marked with thin flags, small triangles of pale paper that stick up like patient teeth. I can feel the dry edge of the plastic against my fingertips. The number I know by heart, the one my wife wrote on the margin years ago because she liked the symmetry of it, waits there like a step I have decided not to rush toward. I do not rush. I flip my notebook to a clean page and write what I can verify. The relative indicated violation. A notice is posted. An officer is present with a form. A guard is present with an incident log. Observers include residents and passers-by. Weather is clear, cool, breeze from the east. I draw a quick sketch: bed, curb, stones, vine line. Because if there is a question later, a drawing can sometimes untie a knot faster than an argument. The pencil leaves a soft gray track that smudges under my palm. I lift my hand each time to keep the smudge from making the bed look wider than it is. The crowd shifts as someone reads the notice on the mailbox aloud in a summary tone. I do not absorb the words, only the cadence. Time, place, consequence. I look down at the nearest pumpkin and see under the dried curl of its stem a thin line of dust that looks like a seam in a baseball. I think about our kitchen and the heavy bowls and the way steam hugs the ceiling when pies come out golden. The memory is not a defense, but it is a reason, and sometimes reasons are the only thing that keeps a man from becoming weathered wood in a storm.
Maya catches my eye and lifts one hand slightly, asking without words if she should come closer. I shake my head half an inch. Not yet. Her phone is tucked into her sleeve like a bookmark. She knows the difference between a moment that needs a lens and a moment that needs a breath. The security guard shifts his weight, the leather on his belt sighing. The compliance officer taps the page on his clipboard once, a small metronome of policy. A maintenance cart rattles past in the lane, a ruined leaf stuck in the tread. The driver glances and then glances away, the way people do when they count themselves lucky not to be the center of any sentence. I track the cart until it disappears around a corner, and then return my eyes to the bed. The stones are exactly where I placed them. The vines curl stop at the line. The sun moves softly and lays a square of light across the smooth back of the nearest pumpkin, as if laying a hand in blessing. I can hear the soft electric hum of the exit sign over the clubhouse door. I can see on the bulletin board a thin strip of new tape where something has been posted in the last hour. The tape is still glossy where fingers pressed it down. A corner of an envelope peeks out from under a stack of agendas. I notice the clock through the window and make a note of it in the margin of my page. The minute hand just clicked over. The compliance officer writes a number on his form. The guard clears his throat. My relative folds her arms in a way that says the performance is ready for its second act. I hold the blue folder steady against my rib cage and steady my breathing against it. The pumpkins sit in their measured calm. The stones keep their quiet line. The air smells like mulch, cold iron, and the faint sugary echo of a pastry box that has already gone inside. I try to gather the scattered pieces of the morning into one place where procedure can find them. Then the security guard steps off the stoop with his incident log open. The compliance officer lifts his pen to note a provisional fine, and the paper on the bulletin board announces an emergency assembly for late afternoon as I look up from my notebook and realize the supervisor is already walking straight toward my pumpkins. The supervisor's shoes crunch softly over the grit along the curb as he approaches, and the crowd's quiet rearranges itself into a thin corridor of space I'm meant to stand inside. His notepad is already open to a fresh page. He asks the compliance officer something I can't hear, and the officer answers by pointing at the vine tips, the river stones, the measured edge of mulch. I keep my palms open and nod once, as if to say I understand this choreography. My breath comes cool and narrow through my nose. The pumpkins don't move, of course, but I imagine I can feel their weight reaching down into the soil the way an anchor finds the riverbed. The supervisor steps to the bed and looks at the stones as if they might confess. The security guard hovers to his right, ready to write, ready to witness. I record each new presence by habit, time, function, action, because paper holds shape when voices won't. A woman behind me whispers that the board will have to make an example, or else everything will slide. That word makes me think of ice under thin snow, the kind that looks walkable until your ankle twists. My relative's folded arms shift up a notch, like she's bracing for applause that hasn't happened yet.
I thank the officers for coming and state plainly that my decorations sit inside the bed, that my stones mark the line, that I've maintained the space for years without incident. I don't ask to be believed. I place the facts on the ground between us the way you set out tools. Here is the measuring tape. Here is the level. Here is the square. The supervisor nods once in a non-committal way and writes an entry. The security guard asks to look inside my blue folder. I loosen my grip and pass it to him without friction. He flips the cover with the same care you might give to a book that doesn't belong to you, and I feel a quiet itch under my ribs as I watch the plastic sleeves slide under his thumb. Maya moves closer by 2 careful steps. I catch her eye and tilt my head toward the pumpkins. She understands and takes a slow pan with her phone,
locking the time and the location, capturing the stones, the shade line, the thin curl of vine that stops at the line like a well-trained dog at a doorway. She doesn't speak. She knows her role is to witness without adding heat. She knows that when a room starts steaming, one person breathing slowly can cool it by example. The compliance officer finishes his preliminary form and asks if I've seen the posted notice. I say I've seen it, but haven't been able to read the details from here. He suggests I head to the office to get a copy and to confirm the process for an emergency assembly. He does not offer to accompany me. The supervisor returns my folder and tells the guard to note cooperation. I feel that word land like a small coin in an empty jar. It sounds neat and quiet in their log. It feels heavier inside my chest. On the way to the administration office, Maya's sneakers click over the grate. The hallway smells like pine cleaner and the old air that gathers behind vending machines. The lobby has a small seating area with upholstered chairs that swallow people when they sit. A digital clock glows above a framed mission statement about community and fairness. The attendant behind the counter is speaking with someone about a parking sticker. I take a number from a plastic dispenser that rattles when I pull, and the paper curls in my hand like a leaf. We stand beneath a vent that blows a thin thread of cool air on my neck. When the person at the counter leaves, I step forward and place my number on the lip of the desk where the attendant can see it. He calls the next in line without looking up, which is not me. I don't protest. I remind myself that the record matters more than the moment. I note the time, the number I hold, the numbers called around me. Maya leans her shoulder against my elbow like a quiet brace. The clock ticks. The tick is too loud for such a small hand. Finally, the attendant looks at me and asks what I need. I tell him I'd like a copy of the posted notice and the process for calling an emergency assembly. He nods and reaches for a stack of papers. He flips through them, hesitates, says the notice copy must be somewhere, then tells me to wait while he checks the back room. 10 minutes fold into 15. People come and go. When he returns, he shrugs and says he can't find the copy and that I should just check the bulletin board. He offers me a pen to write down the meeting time, as though information is a favor. I ask for the general policy on seasonal decorations and whether the board intends to refer to the current rule or a new proposal this afternoon. The attendant says he doesn't handle policy and that the board handles board matters. He slides a blank form toward me and says I can submit a request to speak. The form is smudged at the corner, as if someone dragged a thumb through ink and then wiped it half clean. I fill it out in block letters, because block letters stand firm when cursive sags.
As I finish, the security guard enters the lobby with his incident log under his arm. He pauses when he sees me, then moves to the side of the counter and asks the attendant to initial his entry. The attendant signs without reading. The pen leaves a small tear where it pressed too hard. I watch the tear because sometimes small damage tells you more than a clean surface. Maya leans near the floor brochure rack and takes a picture of the sign listing office hours. Her hood hides half her face, and her eyes track in a circle that places us and the clock inside the frame. On the way out, we pass the bulletin board. A fresh strip of tape shines across a new agenda. The agenda lists a discussion item called Decorations in Common Areas, with no section number attached. A thin envelope sits tucked beneath it. The paper looks thick and serious. The name on its front is marked only with the word Agenda Support. I feel my pulse kick in my throat in that familiar, unwelcome way. The tape smell is still sharp. Someone just posted this. Back at the entry bed, the pumpkins gleam as if holding their own light. The crowd is thinned, leaving behind the condition that follows after any small spectacle. A quiet disturbed only by adjustments. The supervisor is gone. The compliance officer has left a provisional note under my doormat that tells me a review is pending, which is a bureaucratic way of saying, stand by while we gather words. I unfold the note and slip it into a sleeve in my blue folder. I write the file name on a small tab because naming things gives them a place to stand. Maya asks softly if I want water. I say yes, and she jogs to the fountain near the clubhouse and returns with a paper cup that leaks at the seam. The water tastes metallic and cold. I feel it go down and clear the grit from my throat that I didn't know was there. We crouch together at the bed and examine the vine line. She points with 2 fingers at the stones and then at my sketch from earlier, nodding that the distances match. I take 3 photos from waist level and 1 from shoulder level, making sure the curb numbers sit in the corner of the frame like proof of place. A maintenance worker passes with a measuring wheel and slows when he sees me looking. I ask, in the voice I use when I don't want to jostle anyone, whether there's a standard for setback in plantings. He tells me he handles only utilities and that someone else handles aesthetics. He gestures vaguely toward the office, toward wherever policies live before they show up on paper. His wheel clicks along as he goes, a clean metronome against the rough concrete. In the early afternoon light, the pumpkins look less like decoration and more like instruments for seeing who stands where. I feel the shape of the day shift toward that room, that table, that agenda with its nameless line item. I think of my wife and how she loved the way October air stretched over the day like new sheet linen. She used to say that if you spread a clean cloth, people will meet you where you set it down. I want the table to be clean. I want the cloth to be straight. We head back to the clubhouse when the doors open for setup. Inside, the air is cooler than outside, smelling faintly of coffee and dry carpet. Rows of chairs face a long table with microphones like small black birds at rest. At the center of the table, that same envelope sits with its flap still sealed. A stack of agendas lies next to it. The security supervisor stands near the door, checking a list against faces, and gestures people to sign in. I print my name slowly. My pen squeaks on the smooth plastic sheet beneath the paper.
I take a seat near the aisle where I can see both the table and the door. Maya sits beside me and opens her notes app. Around us, the low murmur of neighbors grows and fades like a tide that never quite leaves the shore. The compliance officer enters and takes a place near the end of the table. He pulls a binder close and rests his hand on it like a lid. The board president arrives with a folder under one arm and the envelope in the other hand. He sets the envelope down precisely at the center. He does not look at me. I don't require him to. The room quiets. The clock above the exit sign clicks to the top of the hour. The president clears his throat, lifts his notes, and reaches for the envelope as the security supervisor leans in to whisper something I cannot hear, and I realize the red marker scrawled across the seal of that envelope spells my unit number. The red marker on the envelope stares back at me like a fresh scratch. My unit number is thick and underlined, and for a long breath I feel the center of my chest go hollow as if someone had opened a window there and let the warm air out. The president rests his hand on the paper as if to quiet it. The microphones blink their small red eyes. The room smells like brewed coffee that has cooled past its best, like carpet that has learned every shoe that ever crossed it. My palms are dry against the blue folder, but the inside of my elbows feels damp. I steady the folder against my ribs until I can feel my heartbeat press through the cardboard. Maya sits close enough that her sleeve brushes my forearm. That little tap brings me back to the ground. She has the notes page open with timestamps laid out like steps on a line. I nod once to her and breathe through my nose. The first notes of fatigue settle into my calves from the morning's crouching, and I place both feet flat until they find the cool tile beneath the thin rug. The board president slides the envelope toward the center and sets a paperweight on the flap, a small glass disc with an air bubble inside. A soft buzz overhead from a recessed light makes a faint tremor in the cones of brightness on the table. The sign-in sheet makes its way down my row, pens scrape, the letters of names march by without looking up. I can feel eyes slide across me, then off me, the way water slips away from a rock that refuses to move. I write my name and unit in a print that won't be mistaken. The guard at the door checks a list with a slow finger. The compliance officer pulls a binder closer and rests his wrist on it like a gate. I ease open the blue folder. Plastic sleeves whisper. I take inventory by touch as much as sight. The index tabs I cut from old file labels are still exactly where I placed them. Section 3.2 has a flag. The photo set sits beneath a protective sheet, the date stamps glowing faintly on glossy paper. The nursery tag is flattened inside a transparent pocket, the letters in a tidy green that once sold hope for a season. My request to speak form is signed and initialed where a corner still shows a smear of ink. I run my finger over the round dent of an old paper clip that left its memory in the page last year. The folder smells faintly like dry paper and the vinyl of the sleeves, the way school binders used to smell in September. The board president clears his throat in a way that rearranges the air. He starts the boilerplate. He names safety exits and speaks about community tone and staying on topic. He reads the first line of the agenda. The microphones catch the friction of his pages. I notice that the envelope never leaves the center of the table. The secretary uncaps a pen and sets it to a legal pad, the tip making tiny, even commas of ink that follow every phrase.
I am aware of the small humiliations the day has practiced on me. The ignored turn at the counter, the open inspection of my folder as if a man carrying rules needs rules explained to him. The low murmur that treats my pumpkins as if they were a challenge thrown rather than care laid down. Each one lands with the modest weight of a pebble, but pebbles fill the boot if you walk long enough. I stretch my toes inside my shoes to make a little space and decide that space is not a luxury. It is a tool I can make on demand if I pay attention. The president moves to the second item and pauses. He touches the envelope again. He announces that due to the increasing volume of concerns, the agenda order will adjust to address decorations in common areas earlier. The words are even, but the shift is not neutral. It draws the room forward as if a string has tugged every shoulder. The compliance officer turns a page in his binder, and the flip of it sounds like canvas peeling away from a boat deck. Maya's knee knocks softly once against my chair leg, a signal that she is present and that the timeline in her notes has a new anchor point. I raise my eyes to the bulletin board, visible through the glass pane. The agenda posted there shows a different order than the one now spoken aloud. The tape along the top is still bright and smooth. In the space under it, a slim rectangle of dust marks where the old agenda sat before it was torn down. The dust stripe looks like a faint scar. I note the time in the margin of my notebook and draw an arrow toward the words "Agenda Resequenced." The pencil leaves a crisp, dry line that immediately throws a shadow under this light. The president asks the compliance officer to summarize. The officer speaks in slow, careful language about aesthetics and boundaries and community cohesion. He does not use a section number. He mentions the prospect of a provisional policy to address the fall season. He places a hand on the binder as if to calm it. The security supervisor stands a little straighter near the door. The maintenance worker I saw earlier moves into the back row, his measuring wheel leaning beside him like a sleeping instrument.
My decision rises not as a shout, but as a posture. I choose to sit tall. I choose to be specific. I choose to put the weight of the room on paper where it can be seen. I place section 3.2 at the top of my folder stack and slide the photos under it so the top edges are aligned. I lay my cadenas open and write the sequence I intend to keep: rule, evidence, procedure, proposal. I write each word on its own line with space beneath it as if expecting evidence to arrive and hang on the hook I've set out. Breath in through the nose, hold on 4, out the mouth slow. My wife taught me that rhythm one winter when the pipes froze and nothing in the house would work except the repeating of patience. Maya squeezes the cuff of my sleeve once and lets go. The press of her hand leaves a warmth on the wool that outlasts the contact. I see her angle her phone toward the table in a manner so discreet that anyone watching might think she is just checking a reflection. The screen captures the red blend of the microphone lights and the pale circle where the paperweight sits on the envelope. She tags the photos with time and the seat location row and column, a private code we made after a different meeting, a different season, when proof needed to be stitched all the way through. The president invites public comment after the summary, but adds that time will be limited and that speakers should focus on solutions, not stories. The phrasing pricks at the place on my ribs where the folder presses, a suggestion that lived experience is an extra they haven't budgeted for. I do not stand yet. I mark the language in my notebook and leave a space to translate it into procedure. Proposed limit equals compression of context. I scribble just enough to remind myself later what tone tasted like.
The volunteer from the gardening committee raises a hand. She speaks about past displays and their quiet, how they came and went without friction, how a little color at the edges can soften the long hallway of any year. She references dates in spring and summer and mentions that nothing was harmed. Her voice is steady and keeps even time like a metronome that refuses to march. The secretary writes faster. The board murmurs. The envelope stays shut. The maintenance worker lifts his hand halfway and speaks in terms of equipment and clearance. He says the setback for sprinklers is a practical measure and that the stones on my bed protect the spray heads if anyone is worried. He lists the runs he made that morning with the wheel, clicking off distances as if he were reporting on the length of shadows at noon. The security supervisor notes something in the log, the pen making a tight loop where the letter requires one. My neighbor from the Block C, the woman with a cane polished by years of palm oil and patience, moves to the aisle and speaks about time, about watching things unfold from a window that understands weather. She remembers earlier notices and remembers that more often the problem was too little clarity, not too much decoration. Her words land on the carpet and stay there. I write witness, sequence, corridor of events, and I underline it twice. I feel, among all this, the thin filament of doubt that institutions string like fishing line across familiar rooms. You cannot see it from every angle, but you feel it when it touches your skin. My neck tightens against it. I do not push forward into a tangle. I step back and look for where the light catches it. That is where the line can be shown. That is where a hand can lift it and place a bright tag on it so no one walks into it again. The president finally rests his fingers on the envelope and removes the paperweight. The seal peels with the quiet stick of tape. He slides out a single sheet and places it on the glass disc so it will not curl. Even from my seat, I can see that the sheet has no section numbers, only bullets in a neutral font. The top bullet mentions autumn displays. The second mentions boundaries.
The third mentions enforcement. The fourth mentions discretion. The room shifts its weight forward as if one body. The microphones catch the breadth of the table. I slide section 3.2 to the top of my stack and square its edges until they line up with the folder and the table seam and even the crack in the tile beneath my shoes. I trace the margin with my nails so the flag sits perfectly straight. I align the photo of the bed so the curb numbers show in the lower right corner like coordinates. I sense Maya balancing her phone just enough to mark the slide of the sheet into public view. The air tastes like dust and the last sip of coffee. Then the president announces that speakers will have 90 seconds and that the provisional policy may be adopted for immediate use while the review continues, and he calls my name first. 90 seconds is the shape of a hallway that narrows as you walk it. I stand with the blue folder against my ribs and feel the room lean, not in hostility, just in the weight that rooms carry when a single pair of feet becomes the path everyone will remember. The microphone waits like a small eye. Its red indicator is steady. I think of the morning soil under my fingernails, the quiet weight of the pumpkins, the smell of cold iron lifting off the railing. I think of my wife and the rhythm she taught me for hard hours. In through the nose, hold on 4, out through the mouth slow. I let the air become a bridge between the door I walked through and the table I face now.
I set the folder down flat and open to the first sleeve. The room hears the soft rasp of plastic as if it were a page in a hymnal. I place section 3.2 at the top, flag neat, margin squared. Under it, the photos with date and coordinates. To the left, the nursery tag and the request to speak form with the corner smudge dried into a tiny gray crescent. I'm not here to argue taste. I'm here to map process. I state the scope as a list any pen can follow. The current rule allows seasonal decorations until the end of October. The bed is inside the marked line. The stones protect equipment. Inspection occurred. Cooperation was noted. A notice is posted. An emergency agenda is proposed. My voice is made for porches and small kitchens. It stays even. I point to the pictures and describe what they show that matters, because a frame tells a story faster than memory can. The curb number sits in the bottom corner. The shadow line falls behind the stones, not under them. The vine curls stop where the barrier begins. I see the words in the same order I wrote them in the notebook, because repetition knits the morning to this moment. I do not mention my relative, or the folded arms, or the angle of a certain face when I bent to the bed. This is not about faces. This is about lines on ground and lines on paper. Maya sits 2 chairs back and a palm width to the right in the lane we agreed on. She holds herself still the way only a child who trusts the plan can, eyes on the screen that records the time at the top by itself. She is my quiet counterweight. Every now and then, the screen's light touches the curve of her cheek and returns to shadow. The steadiness of her presence is a second pulse under my own. I ask for the record to reflect the timeline, not to embarrass anyone, but to make a clean path for the people who will stand here after me. I describe the ignored turn at the counter in terms of sequence, not slight. The inspection of my folder becomes a notation in the log, not a grievance. The emergency agenda becomes a question of order and reference, not motive. I say that I would like the current rule read into the record before any provisional measure is considered, because rules are anchors and should not be traded for rope while a boat is still in the channel. The secretary's pen makes a new rhythm now, the kind that moves from commas to periods. The security supervisor checks his log and nods once to the president.
A simple gesture that says cooperation recorded, time stamped. The maintenance worker shifts the measuring wheel so its rubber edge doesn't scuff the floor. The volunteer from the gardening committee adjusts a small stack of papers and sets a flyer on top, a calendar of seasonal activities no one has objected to in years. The room starts to feel less like a theater and more like a workshop. I bring out the draft I wrote at my kitchen table with a ruler and patience and slide it across the glass toward the secretary. It is not a demand, it is a template with blanks. It names the space, the setback, the dates, the method for notice, the person who signs, the time allowed for correction, the clear path to appeal. The lines are wide enough for real handwriting. The language is plain enough that a neighbor could read it out loud to another neighbor without tripping. I tell the table that if the board wants to edit, they should. But if the community wants predictability, something like this should exist where everyone can see it. The board president touches the paper with 2 fingers, then passes it to the secretary, who clips it behind the minutes with a practiced click. The security officer opens his binder to a tab that was not there when he began and slides out a laminated page that looks like an index of current sections. He runs his finger down until it stops where mine will stop. I notice as he moves that his hand is not tense anymore. The room exhales a fraction it didn't know it was holding.
I use the last part of my time to trace the arc of the day with as few words as possible. Garden bed at dawn, concern raised, officer called, inspection conducted, notice posted, office visit recorded, agenda adjusted, evidence organized, request to read the applicable section placed before the table, not to stall, to align. The very small humiliations of the day are not my closing. My closing is a door opened and held so the next person doesn't have to reach past a shoulder to slip through. When the red light on the microphone softens, I step back without adding a single word I would regret later. The president thanks me in the way meetings thank a person, not warm, not cold, just moving. He turns to the volunteer from the gardening committee, and she confirms the calendar of past seasons with dates, which the secretary writes down with the same pen. The maintenance worker speaks in 2 short bursts about equipment clearance and the size of the stones that protect the spray heads. The security supervisor matches entries in his log with times on the agenda as if sewing a seam that needed reinforcement. Each sub-thread that frayed earlier finds a stitch. I sit and Maya slides a small folded note onto my knee. No words, just the tiny dot she draws when she wants me to know the timestamp is clean. The paper is soft from the heat of her hand. I tuck it into the back of the folder where I keep reminders that aren't official but matter. Across the aisle, my neighbor from Block C leans back with the slow relief of someone whose cane has done its work. The relative who first raised the concern is somewhere behind me, but I feel no heat at my neck now, only the cool draft from the vent that has finally found its way to the center of the room. The president confers with the secretary and then addresses order with a tone that suggests both caution and intent. He says the board will hear the current section read before discussion of a provisional measure, a sequence that sounds to me like a walkway laid over a puddle. The microphones stop winking and simply listen. The laminated index page waits by the compliance officer's hand. The secretary places my draft policy next to the minutes so it can be found when the minutes are typed. The envelope that once carried my unit number sits open and empty now, its contents turned into air and steps rather than a surprise sprung on paper. I take a breath that reaches the back of my shoulders and let it go as if releasing a knot from a string. The room carries a new quiet, not heavy, not expectant, just clean. I think of the pumpkins in their measured line, the stones that take the brunt so the stems don't, the way a small garden can make a big idea understandable. I think of my wife's hand resting in flour, open and light, patting dough until it accepted its shape. Procedure can be like that if you let it, not a hammer, a palm. Maya leans slightly toward me and I feel the edge of her sleeve find the back of my hand for a heartbeat. I don't look at her, I look at the copy of the rule in my folder. Its flag straight, its margins clear, its sentences ready to be spoken in the order they were written. The board president signals to the compliance officer to proceed with the reading. I set my palms flat on the table, feel the fine grit of paper fibers under my skin, and let the steady air of October fill my chest until the words can carry their own weight. The compliance officer lifts the laminated index and reads the header with a steady voice. I hear the rustle of the room as people settle deeper into their chairs, the soft thud of a purse set down, the small cough someone tries to swallow. I keep my palms flat and let the words find their groove. He reads the preface that defines intent, then the part that distinguishes common areas from private beds, then the line that points all of us toward the section that matters. He stops, looks at the president, and the president nods toward me. I rise without scraping the chair and take the copy of the rule I brought, its flag straight, its paper warm from my folder.
I begin with the title and the date of adoption, because dates make rules belong to time instead of rumor. The page smells like clean fiber and faint glue. Section 3.2 permits seasonal decorations through October 31st, provided they do not obstruct pathways, utilities, or emergency access and remain within designated beds. I read each condition and then pause so the secretary's pen can touch down. I name setback, height, and the responsibility to remove items by the deadline. I don't say anything about pumpkins or memory. I don't need to. The line between rule and rumor begins to show itself in the air like a faint thread under good light. The compliance officer takes my copy, compares it to his index, and nods once. The president asks whether the bed in question meets those conditions. I describe the stones, the path, the line where shadow falls behind the border. I hold up the photo with the curb numbers visible. I set it where the board can see. The maintenance worker speaks from the back in his plain, practical cadence. The stones protect the spray heads. The vines do not cross the border. Setback is adequate. The security supervisor confirms the incident log times and notes cooperation and inspection without incident. He looks at me and does not look away the way people sometimes do when their role shifts from gate to witness. The relative who raised the concern clears her throat from behind me. I feel the ripple in the room the way a pond feels a small thrown stone. The president thanks her for bringing attention to a matter of policy and asks her to refrain from personal remarks. The way he shapes that request matters. It takes heat out of the air and leaves only light. The volunteer from the gardening committee steps to the aisle and reads the calendar of past seasons. She names spring blossoms that came and went without complaint, small lights in winter windows that dimmed on time, the fall wreaths that turned quietly to compost in November. The board listens and the room lifts a fraction, as if it remembered how to breathe. I turn to the template I offered earlier and place it on the glass again. It calls for the exact text of 3.2 to be posted with a simple diagram and 2 dates in the month of October, opening and closing, along with a clear path to appeal. The secretary clips the page to the minutes and asks the president whether to consider adoption as guidance pending formal revision. The compliance officer, who has been careful all afternoon to speak only from what is printed, adds that a 1-page summary posted in plain language would reduce confusion more than any memo written in hurry after an argument. That is his way of saying we need a slow tool for a fast moment. The president leans into his microphone and speaks not to me, but to the room.
He states that inspection without cause should not include rummaging through personal documents unless safety requires it. He says that order of service at the counter will follow the number in a hand, not the volume of a voice. He acknowledges the emergency agenda was reordered without sufficient clarity and instructs that changes be posted next to prior versions with timestamps so viewers can see what moved. He assigns the security supervisor to convene a short training on process and tone before the next meeting. None of this is apology in the language of confession, but in the language of a board, it is an admission shaped into a promise. The relative asks if she can speak. The president nods and limits the time. She says she did not intend to raise a crowd, that she worried about uniformity, that she thought rules were being overlooked. She does not look at me as she speaks. I don't require her to. She asks whether the board will consider a cap on quantity or color or theme. The compliance officer answers that 3.2 allows seasonal displays without dictating taste. The template before them addresses size and placement and dates, not hues or opinions. The relative returns to her seat. The sound she makes setting her bag down is louder than her voice.
Maya squeezes the cuff of my sleeve and releases it. Her presence at my side has held my pulse steady all afternoon. I can feel her posture ease now, shoulders down, chin level, phone asleep in her lap with the record saved and backed up. She is 12, and she will someday live in rooms like this and decide whether to offer heat or light. I hope she chooses light, or at least shade when the room is too bright to see clearly. The president asks the secretary to read back the motion to post the current section with a diagram and deadline dates, to standardize counter service order, and to require log entries when inspections of personal items are requested. The secretary reads in a calm cadence. A member moves to adopt the guidance as interim procedure pending a formal revision in the next scheduled meeting. Another member seconds. The president calls for discussion, then for a vote. The board raises hands. The motion carries. The microphones blink and then go still. Consequences begin their small walk into the room. The security supervisor notes the training session date in his log and asks the compliance officer to attend. The compliance officer agrees and requests a copy of the minutes draft to review with his team. The attendant from the office will be required to implement a visible ticket system at the counter by tomorrow afternoon. The relative is asked to collect a copy of the posted guidance when it goes up and to share it with her immediate row so future concerns can start with the rule in hand instead of in the air. The maintenance worker is authorized to paint a faint line at the edge of the bed that aligns with the diagram, a visual cue that asks nothing from anyone except attention. I stand when the president asks if I have anything to add. I say I do not, other than gratitude for a path that others can walk without stepping into the same holes. The volunteer from the gardening committee smiles in a way that keeps her teeth out of it. The neighbor from Block C taps her cane once, a rhythm that says enough in a room that has had too much of everything but enough. The secretary slides my draft into a clear pocket and labels it with today's date. The label maker chirps and spits out the strip with the neat black letters. When the meeting closes, I gather my folder without haste. The October light outside has turned a thin gold that makes the parking lot look like a place from a postcard, ordinary and dear. The air smells like cut grass and cooling concrete. We walk the short distance to the bed. The stones are where I placed them. The vine tips hold their line. The pumpkins sit like small suns, warming the edge of a long afternoon. I touch the nearest one with a knuckle and feel its skin, firm and cool,
holding the hours we just lived like a secret it will never need to tell. Maya asks if we can take one last photo for our record, and I nod. She frames the shot so the curb numbers sit in the corner. The camera captures the square of light, the stones, and a sliver of my sleeve. She lowers the phone and leans into me. The day has not turned into celebration, it has turned into clarity. And clarity is what you can build on. I close the folder and feel the clean weight of paper that finally matches the weight of the ground. I stand there long enough for the breeze to thread through the vines and for the world to settle back into the shape of itself.
The board did not praise me. They did not need to. The rule was read, the sequence was repaired, and the promise to publish in plain words found its way into a record that belongs to everyone who lives here. The small humiliations of the day did not evaporate. They did something quieter. They turned into steps that led to a room where paper spoke and people listened. Maya squeezes my sleeve again. I put my hand over hers and keep it there until we both feel the warmth go all the way through. I breathe the October air and let it fill my ribs. The sky's the kind of blue that looks rinsed and hung. The bed is the size it has always been, only now it feels held rather than cornered. I think of my life's hands, dusted with flour, pressing dough into a circle without tearing it. The work was never about force, it was always about patience and shape. Dignity holds when process holds, and today the process, at last, learned our names. Dignity is defended with calm and proof. Justice is the shape paper takes when it finally sees the person. If you liked the story, tap like, subscribe, and write what you'd do if it were your family. I'll be here for the next one.